January 5th, 1931. A cold, dimly lit room in Berlin. What seems like just another meeting between two men is, in reality, the moment when the course of history would change forever. One man, Adolf Hitler, is still a rising unknown figure with a thirst for power burning inside him. The other, Hjalmar Schacht, is a financial genius, a mastermind capable of bending economies to his will. But this was no ordinary encounter. This was the night that set in motion a secret alliance that would shape the fate of nations and drag the world into chaos. Schacht was not just a banker. He was the architect of the financial empire that would fuel the Nazi war machine. An invisible force whose genius was so powerful that it fooled the entire world. But how? How did a man who was once known as the Dark Wizard of international finance build an empire so quietly that America, Britain, and France didn't see it coming until it was too late? Imagine this. An economy on the brink of collapse. Yet under Schacht's hand, it's turned into a war machine that no one ever saw coming. But as the beast he helped make got stronger, Schacht's own fate twisted into something far darker than he ever imagined. Without Schacht, would Hitler have ever come to power? Would the war machine have ever been built? Could this one dinner have been the spark that led to the firestorm of World War II? This is the untold story of Hjalmar Schacht, banker who didn't just fund a dictator, he became trapped by the very system he created, and it all started with one fateful meeting. It all begins with a young German, born into a life of privilege, a family of wealth and high expectations. His world was one of books, knowledge, and ambition. A world where education and intellect were his ticket to success. By 1899, he had already earned a doctorate in economics. Just a few years later, in 1903, he found himself at the heart of a small but powerful German bank. With his sharp mind and ambition, it was only a matter of time before he rose through the ranks. By 1908, just 5 years later, he was the deputy manager. He wasn't just playing the game, he intended to dominate it. His desires were huge: massive wealth, lasting fame, and an ego to match. He showed off his connections, his smarts, his power. However, his world and the world around him was about to change forever. The year was 1919. Germany lay in ruins. The aftermath of World War I had destroyed the nation. The Treaty of Versailles was signed, and it was a brutal blow. As a member of the German delegation, Schacht traveled to the Netherlands to negotiate over war reparations and the delivery of goods. He expected diplomacy, perhaps a sense of respect, but what he encountered shattered his belief in the system. The Allies treated them like criminals, watching their every move, their every word. The hotel they were given was nothing more than a filthy shell. Their food tasteless, their surroundings bleak. But it wasn't just the discomfort, it was the humiliation. The kind that made his stomach churn and his blood boil. And then the moment came. When Schacht and his colleagues entered the negotiation room, they found no chairs, no place to sit. They were forced to stand, an act of deliberate degradation. One of his colleagues, unable to hold his anger, dared to protest. The Allied negotiators' response was cold, venomous, and it struck with the force of a dagger. You've forgotten that your country lost the war. That moment, that slap in the face, would not fade. It seared into Schacht's memory, carving out a deep, bitter anger that would remain with him for the next 2 decades. He swore revenge. This wasn't a passing moment of anger. It was the birth of something darker, more calculated. Schacht would not forget. He would not forgive. And he began to plan, carefully, step by step, his revenge. But how would it unfold? Well, I'll tell you. Just wait. The country was in ruins. The air was thick with desperation. The once proud mark had lost its value so drastically that people needed wheelbarrows full of currency to buy a single loaf of bread. The streets were crowded with the broken dreams of citizens, and the government, lost in chaos, seemed unable to stop the spiral. 6 different administrations had tried and failed, leaving Germany's future hanging by a thread. In the midst of this economic collapse, Schacht had found his place at the center of the storm. No longer the young outsider, he was now one of the most powerful figures in Germany's financial world. He had cemented his position, and in this moment of crisis, his influence was about to grow even more. Then, fate intervened. Schacht's old friend Gustav had just been elected Chancellor of Germany. His first priority was to address the deepening currency crisis. The mark had lost so much value that trust in it had evaporated. People were desperate for change, and Gustav knew there was only one man who could make it happen: Schacht. First, Schacht was set to take the position of governor of the central bank, but the position was already filled. However, Gustav was not one to follow the rules if they didn't fit his needs. He created a new position within the Ministry of Finance, Currency Commissioner, with the same authority as the central bank. The job was Schacht's, if he wanted it. Schacht took the position, but the offer came with a catch. His new office? A tiny, cramped storage room, with only a single secretary to help him. The message was clear: fix the currency. Do it with almost nothing. Schacht didn't hesitate. He saw the task ahead of him not as a burden, but as an opportunity. The mark was worthless. The price of bread was soaring, and the people had lost hope. But Schacht had an idea, a radical one. Germany's gold reserves were pitifully small to back the currency, so instead of relying on gold, Schacht proposed a new solution. Peg the new currency to real, tangible assets: agricultural land, industry, real estate. These were things the people could trust, things they could feel. It was a gamble, but Schacht's gamble paid off. Slowly, the people began to understand. They began to believe in it, and the new currency took root. Inflation, which had once soared into the millions of percentage points, plummeted to just 15%. The German economy, once on the brink of collapse, began to revive. Schacht had pulled off the impossible. The press hailed him as the wizard and miracle man. The people called him the Caesar of the German economy. On November 15th, 1923, the central bank president, his reputation shattered by the mark's collapse, suffered a sudden heart attack and died. Schacht had delivered. The old currency was dead, and the new one was thriving. The future of Germany's economy now lay in Schacht's hands. On December 20, 1923, Schacht was appointed the new president of the central bank. But Schacht's victory came with a price. The government's resistance, the growing opposition, it all began to weigh on him. Was the cost of success too high? Stay with me to reveal how Schacht's world would soon unravel, leading him to a decision that no one saw coming. In 1929, Schacht, trusted by central banks, helped create the Young Plan, a new agreement to ease Germany's war reparations. It was meant to lift the nation's financial burden, but to many it was another humiliating concession to the Allies. After the Treaty of Versailles, any negotiation with former enemies was seen as a betrayal of national pride. The public, already broken by defeat, could not forgive him. Schacht's brilliance turned into suspicion. His role in the Young Plan marked him as a traitor, and soon the press and opposition turned against him. What had once been his victory became the beginning of his public downfall. Then tragedy struck. Gustav Stresemann, the former chancellor and Schacht's friend, suddenly died of a heart attack. The loss was devastating. And as Chancellor Heinrich Brüning took power, The government was too passive, too slow to take decisive action on reparations. Schacht had always been a man of action, but now the political system he had worked so hard to rebuild seemed to fail him at every turn. But worse yet, the Great Depression swept across the world, deepening the crisis. Schacht's faith in the government wavered, and his disillusionment grew. Overwhelmed, he resigned, walking away from the broken political system that had once been his stage. It was here, at this very moment, that Schacht found himself aligning with the rising political force, one that promised change, but also risked leading Germany down a darker path. After quitting his job, Schacht enjoyed his free time, traveling and relaxing, and for a moment, life seemed peaceful. But everything changed during an ordinary trip to America. While aboard the ship, Schacht found himself with a book in his hands. It was a book that would stir his soul and shift the course of his life forever. Hitler's Mein Kampf. As Schacht read, a spark reignited, a fire that had been smoldering since that humiliating moment in the Netherlands. His long-planned revenge, which had simmered in the shadows, began to take shape. The stage was set, and Schacht's story of financial brilliance, personal humiliation, and thirst for vengeance was about to reach its final act. By 1931, Germany stood at the crossroads of history. Hitler had risen, but his journey to total control was far from complete. He was still playing the political game, operating within the laws, but there was a glaring weakness in his strategy: his utter lack of understanding of economics. Hitler needed more than speeches. He needed an economic plan that could unite the people, heal the wounds of defeat, and lift the heavy burden of reparations. But who could deliver this? The answer was simple: Schacht, the economic Kaiser, the very man who had once saved Germany from the brink of financial collapse. 50, Schacht was still a towering figure, his ego burning with ambition. But could a man who had already reached the pinnacle of financial power accept a subordinate role? The answer was clear: he would not. Any return to politics had to be on his terms, with absolute authority. And so Schacht re-entered the political fray. In January 1931, a pivotal meeting was arranged between him and Hitler, mediated by a prominent banker, Hermann Göring. It was a tense meeting, but what happened behind closed doors would change everything. Hitler, usually full of arrogance, displayed surprising humility. He acknowledged Schacht's immense stature. But inside Hitler's mind, something darker was at play. This is the man I need, he thought. I'll use him for my glory. Schacht, in Hitler's eyes, was the key to Germany's economic resurgence, and perhaps his own rise to total power. But in this high-stakes game of power, who would outmaneuver whom? Stick with me, and we'll uncover the answer. Hjalmar was no longer just a financial genius. He was a key player in the Nazi cause. With ruthless determination, he rallied the industrial elite, securing their funding for the movement. Within months, the Nazis had become the largest party in Germany, capturing 33% of the vote. But despite their rise, President Hindenburg hesitated. He wasn't ready to hand over the reins to Hitler. Hjalmar, using his deep connections, took charge. He mobilized top economists and gathered their signatures on a petition demanding Hitler's appointment. The pressure worked. On January 30, 1933, Hitler became chancellor. But Hitler's hold on power was still fragile. To solidify his rule, he needed money. Massive amounts of money. Hjalmar, with his resourcefulness, delivered. When Hitler demanded 3 million marks to eliminate opposition and fuel propaganda, Hjalmar assembled 25 influential industrialists who trusted him. 2 days later, Hitler had the money, with the promise of non-interference. The stage seemed set. But then the Reichstag, which is the German parliament, erupted in flames. The Nazis blamed the communists, using it as an excuse to silence their opposition and consolidate their grip on power. Yet their hunger for control wasn't satisfied. Hitler needed more. He needed the full backing of the central bank. Hans Luther, the president of the central bank, wasn't willing to give it. So, once again, Hjalmar stepped in. He proposed a radical idea. The central bank must fund massive infrastructure projects to create jobs and jumpstart the economy. It worked. Hjalmar was reinstated as president of the Reichsbank, and soon after he was appointed head of the economics ministry. With those moves, Hjalmar held exceptional power. The road ahead for Germany was nothing short of impossible. Hitler's vision was clear. Rearmament. He dreamed of rebuilding a military force capable of standing toe-to-toe with the world's superpowers. But there was one monumental problem: money. No one was willing to lend Germany a cent. The scars of the past were too fresh. Any loan would come with relentless inspections, questions, and distrust. Borrowing seemed out of the question, and printing money risked repeating the hyperinflation nightmare that had devastated Germany before. Germany was stuck in a vice, caught between the desperate need for military strength and the fear of repeating history's darkest financial chapter. But Hjalmar saw an opportunity where others saw only obstacles. He knew that to rebuild the economy, he had to get the people's savings, locked away in their homes, back into circulation. He then developed a clever plan. A fictitious company known as Mefo would issue bonds guaranteed by the government with returns up to 4%. To the public, this was the golden chance they had been waiting for. Offering the security they carved without the risk they feared, the bonds seemed strong and reliable. Even companies like General Motors, known for their careful investments, jumped on board. Since the government insured the bonds, they seemed like a safe investment. Their appeal was much enhanced by the high interest rates. But here's the genius part. When the bonds came due, the government secretly printed money to pay off the investors, who then simply bought new bonds, continuing the cycle. This created an endless loop that funded Germany's military buildup without causing inflation. In just a few months, 12 billion marks flooded into the system, providing the funds for rearmament. Schacht had turned an unworkable scenario into a financial miracle. The people were back in the system, their savings fueling the national growth, free from concern about financial collapse. And in the shadows, the world didn't see it coming. The Allies and even the Americans unknowingly financed Germany's war machine. In 1936, Hitler's ambition knew no bounds. He demanded a plan to arm Germany, no matter the cost. Hermann Göring, eager to please, took charge. Schacht, the country's economic genius, warned that this rapid rearmament would lead to inflationary disaster. But Hitler and Göring were determined. The stakes were high. They needed a war-ready Germany. Over just a few years, spending on arms exploded from 4% of the national budget to a staggering 40%. But Schacht's fears were clear. It could break the economy. Göring didn't care. For him, the war machine was everything. Their push for rearmament left Schacht on the sidelines. The relationship between Schacht and Göring grew toxic, and Schacht, once the nation's financial savior, was pushed out. In 1937, Schacht confronted Hitler, telling him plainly, "Choose me or choose Göring." Hitler, torn, decided to keep both men. But this fragile balance didn't last. Despite his demotion, Hitler had not forgotten Schacht's earlier successes. Unemployment had dropped from 7 million to virtually zero under his leadership. Schacht was made head of the central bank, a symbolic post with no real power. Yet, anger festered in his heart. The betrayal, the manipulations. It was too much. And so, in secret, Schacht began playing both sides, meeting with the Nazi regime's enemies, secretly providing them with information. One evening, Schacht discovered something chilling. Microphones were hidden in his apartment. He knew then that he had become a suspect, a man who walked the line between loyalty and treason. His double dealings were growing riskier, but Schacht believed there was only one way to save Germany from ruin. Hitler had to be stopped. In 1938, after the anti-Jewish rampage orchestrated by the Nazis, Schacht took a bold step, seeking talks with British Jewish representatives, hoping to push Hitler to end his reign of terror. But nothing came of it. Hitler was enraged. He summoned Schacht to Berlin and, in a stunning move, dismissed him. Schacht's power was officially gone. However, Schacht's story was far from over. In 1944, the failed assassination attempt on Hitler sent shockwaves through the regime. Schacht, though not part of the inner circle, was deeply involved in the resistance. His name had even circulated as a potential replacement for Hitler. The morning after the assassination attempt, Schacht's home was raided. He was arrested and sent to a concentration camp. But Schacht survived. Unlike many, he was a special prisoner. His life was never at risk, though he was caught in a terrifying limbo. In 1945, as the war ended, Schacht was liberated by the Americans, having narrowly escaped execution. He was interrogated for weeks and later put on trial at Nuremberg. Despite his dark ties to the Nazi regime, Schacht was found innocent. His manipulation of money, his silent resistance, and his role in the regime's collapse were all but erased from history. And this was the story of Hjalmar Schacht, whose brilliance saved Germany from financial ruin, but also fueled the Nazi war machine. If you've been captivated by the rise and fall of Hjalmar Schacht, there are many more untold stories of history's most complex figures. So hit the notification bell to stay updated on our latest videos. Thank you for watching.